lot of policy work, as well to be able to support professionals who work with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning young people in systems of care, including the child welfare system. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about, first sort of the issue at hand, because I think a lot of folks don't have that context. And then I'll tell you a little bit about our approach to this, as well as some ways that you can get involved. I am joined by my colleague Nako, who is one of our training and development instructors, as well as Andrew, who is one of our summer interns from Yale. So just shameless plug that if you're looking to volunteer, get some internship hours, anything like that, we would love to have you, whether it's on my team or anywhere else in the center. So just a little bit about the LGBT Center. Some of you may have heard of us or utilized our services in the past. We are the world's oldest and largest LGBT social service organization. We actually started the same year as the Stonewall Rebellion, 1969, and we have 10 locations across LA County. That includes our Trans Wellness Center in Koreatown, our Mi Centro location in Boyle Heights, and our Center South in the Leimert Park neighborhood. And we have over 800 staff and hundreds of volunteers who make all of the work that we do possible. We see over 50,000 clients every single month. Free low-cost services. So again, if you need services, you don't have to be part of the community, but you can get free or low-cost services from us in multiple languages. And that spans, honestly, really any need that you can think of. If we don't offer it directly here, we can refer you out to somebody who can. That includes a federally qualified health center that includes everything from primary care to specialty health care, mental health care, gender affirming care, you name it. Legal services, including asylum and refugee services, intimate partner violence support, and a lot of other things. We have an amazing cultural arts program. They put on beautiful productions at our theater. We have an art gallery featuring trans and queer artists, and so many other things, including our youth services department, which services young people experiencing homelessness and other systems of care under the age of 25, including at our drop-in center and shelter here in Hollywood, where I'm located. So that's just a little bit of very quick information about the center. And again, I will include my contact information at the end if anybody has questions about services or getting connected. So I want to tell you a little bit about sort of the RISE program and who we are, why it is we do what we do. It's perfect to go right after Cynthia. Cynthia tees us up beautifully because it gives such a nice context to this work. RISE stands for Recognize, Intervene, Support, and Empower. So we recognize first and foremost that there are LGBTQ+ young people in foster care. That may seem like a no-brainer, but of course, even in 2022, a lot of providers, a lot of caregivers still may believe that this is not a population that is prevalent within the system. We intervene as adult allies of young people when we see instances of bias, harassment, discrimination coming up. We provide support to colleagues in the field to be able to do that work more effectively. And well, actually, we support the young people and then we empower our colleagues to do the same. So we've had basically three primary goals since we started around 2014. The first is to reduce the overall number of LGBTQ+ youth in systems of care, foster care, the juvenile carceral system, mental health systems, homelessness, all of those different systems. The second goal is to increase permanency options, which Cynthia talked a little bit about. And then the last goal is to decrease bias and discrimination in care through learning opportunities with professionals and caregivers. This idea of permanency, which Cynthia kind of presented a portion of that, right, is a term that you hear a lot within foster care and the child welfare system. Permanency means something different depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to maybe an attorney of a child in foster care, permanency we may think of that as, placement and permanency. Do they have a safe and stable place to stay? Maybe an adoption plan or something else of that matter. If we're talking to a mental health professional, if we're talking to a court-appointed special advocate, all of these different folks, because there are dozens of people involved in any given case, may have a different idea of what permanency means. That being said, at RISE, we try to think about it as holistically and openly and expansively as possible. So it's all of these things and more: the physical, legal, social, mental, and emotional safety, stability, and well-being for young people. If you think about all of yourselves, right, you're in college, you're adults, right, and you still need more than just a roof over your head, right? There's probably times where you're maybe calling a family member, a loved one, a good friend, maybe a mentor in your life where you're like, hey, I need your help with this thing, you know, even though I'm an adult, I need emotional support. Not just on my bad days, but on my good days. I want to celebrate the fact that I did really well on that final. So permanency is, like I said, all those things and more, all the things that a young person needs, not only to survive, but to thrive. And that's really important because our approach to this work is to really emphasize that permanency is more than just a roof over somebody's head. And it is more than somebody who takes the child to school. It's somebody who loves and cares about them, who's invested in their success and well-being, somebody who can be trusted and reliable to that young person. So if we're thinking about sort of the landscape of who we are serving, within the national population of LGBTQ plus young people, it's believed around anywhere from 10 to 15% of youth self-identify within this. Any of you who are interested or going into a research type field will, I'm sure, appreciate that we always say sort of self-identified, right? Because when we're talking about vulnerable and marginalized populations, we know that there's going to be underreporting for lots of different reasons. So to the best of the research, this is what we're looking at. So about 10 to 15%. Gen Z has the highest percentage of out LGBTQ plus people of any generation. Not surprising when we think about visibility, access to resources, all those things, right? So then when we start to look at different systems of care, though, we see a very different picture. At least 40% of young people experiencing homelessness self-identify as being part of the community. In LA County, to put that into perspective, every single night, we have a couple thousand young people experiencing homelessness, literal homelessness, meaning they are living on the streets in an encampment or another place not designed for habitation. So they're not in a shelter, they're not sleeping on their friend's couch, they are, you know, literal street homeless. In the carceral juvenile justice system, it's about 1 in 5 or 20% at least. When we start to look at additional nuances, so the intersections of things like race, we definitely see these numbers go up. So when we start to look at BIPOC, young people, so Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, we again see that convergence. And there's a lot more that I could get into about that, but I won't. If you want studies and research and citations, happy to point you in those directions. And then a couple of statistics around child welfare. There's a few different interesting stats. So one of the most recent national studies said around 23%, so over 1 in 5 young people in child welfare are a part of this community. When we did our initial study, we actually partnered with the Williams Institute at UCLA to do this study, and it was sort of the first of its kind. At the time, we looked at LA County DCFS. As Cynthia mentioned, LA County has the largest child welfare system in the country. That is not an accomplishment. That is not something we should be proud of, because that means we have the most children in foster care anywhere else in the country. And then there was a more recent study out of the American Academy of Pediatrics journal that found that actually closer to 1 in 3 young people, if not higher, self-identify as being part of the community. What we also found in that Williams Institute study that we conducted is over 90% of those young people were also youth of color. Not surprising, again, when you also look at the racial makeup and ethnic makeup of youth in care generally. And there's a lot of work that's been done, especially over the past few years, to really address the racial disparities that exist within LA County system. And it also exists across the state and across the country. The last thing here relates to school-based bullying and harassment. So for young people who are in a K through 12 school setting, pretty much all of them say they've experienced some type of bullying or harassment based on their identity or perceived identity. Now, the reason I mention all of these different things, even though only one of them relates directly to child welfare, is there's this convergence that happens of young people crossing over into multiple systems. When we see a young person, for example, who's in the child welfare system and also in the juvenile probation system, that's what we call a dual status young person, meaning they have status in multiple court systems. They have status in the dependency system, child welfare system, right? And then they also have status in the juvenile courts. But we know that all of these things have an effect on one another. So majority of young people experiencing homelessness have also had some contact or exposure to the child welfare system. Same thing with juvenile justice system. And again, when it comes to things like school-based harassment and success, we know that that can also be something that affects that child's long-term permanency. So as I mentioned, the things about permanency that we really try to do is address those barriers. And some of those barriers are motivated around people's feelings, attitudes, beliefs towards this community. Sometimes that comes, as I mentioned, because there's dozens of people involved in any case, sometimes that comes from the caregiver, the biological family, right, the home of origin. Sometimes that comes from resource families. A couple of things that I also forgot to mention, I usually share a little bit about myself and my background, but maybe I'll do that at the very end, just from a, you know, even though it's not the career panel day, just to give you a little bit of insight onto my own background. Resource families, and I have been a relative caregiver. Sometimes it's from the bench officer. That's who we refer to, because in LA County, they can be a judge or they can be a commissioner. So they're not always a judge, which is why we call them bench officers, because they're not, you know, always a judge. Could be from the attorney, including the child's own attorney, or the county's attorney, or the parent's attorney. It could be from the mental health professionals. Again, think about any and everyone who could come into contact possibly with this child. Those are all opportunities for biases. Now, we all have biases. Every single one of us, there's 29 people in this Zoom room today. We all have biases. It's normal. It's part of the human experience. Now, when you are a professional, and in particular, when you are a professional serving other people, it's really important that you are able to address and interrupt those biases if they are having a negative effect on people. And in this case, they are. So when we're looking at things like anti-gay bias, anti-transgender bias, and heterosexism, we're referring to those negative beliefs. Anti-gay bias is the hatred, aversion, or discrimination towards lesbian, gay, or bisexual folks people perceive to be or people associated with. This shows up in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's a potential foster parent who, when approached to have a child placed in their home, says, I can't have a gay child in my home because I'm not comfortable with that. I'm afraid of how they might influence the other children in my home, right? So that's based in the stereotype and misinformation. Sometimes it's something like anti-transgender bias, again, hatred, aversion, discrimination towards folks who are transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming, people perceived to be, or people associated with. This is, again, all too common. Sometimes it looks like maybe a professional who says, I refuse to call this child by this name or this set of pronouns. That's not what the documentation says, despite the fact that state law and local policy say that that child does have the right to go by their affirmed name and pronoun. And then heterosexism, the idea that everyone is or should be heterosexual. And one of the easiest examples of this is the fact that if you think about services, even for yourself, right? If you went on campus and you needed some service, all services are inherently going to be safe for cisgender and heterosexual people. You do not ever have to screen a service to make sure that they are going to be knowledgeable and affirming towards LGBTQ+ people, for example. And so these different forms of biases are really pervasive in service delivery and overall permanency of young people. As I mentioned, I gave you different examples. That can take place on different levels, from the individual actors to the actual institutions themselves, including the ways that laws and policies are developed or implemented. So if we think about permanency in this more holistic way, right, all of these different areas and domains of somebody's life we have an opportunity to do better, right? We have an opportunity to be better in our work. And I know many of you are from different sort of discipline areas, majors, minors, et cetera, and are interested in different career paths, right? The fact of the matter is, no matter what profession you may be going into when it comes to something around sort of social services in particular, is you're going to be coming into contact with LGBTQ plus people because they are everywhere. They are across all different socioeconomic statuses, all races and ethnicities, all immigration statuses, all disabilities, right? LGBTQ plus people are everywhere. And in all of these domains, it's important that there are folks who better understand how to serve this community and are able to really be affirming and create quality care. This is just some additional sort of research and pieces to give you sort of more insights into the ways then that those biases that I talked about, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about our approach to this, because we are a national program. So although our direct services are here in LA County, the training and coaching that the team that I work with does, so Andrew, Nako, and others, happens on a national scale. We get to work with jurisdictions across the country. Some of the things we found during that study in 2014 was that LGBTQ plus youth were 2 times as likely to report poor treatment by the system or in care than their cisgender or heterosexual counterparts. We also found that they were 2 times as likely to be placed in a group facility. Now, Cynthia made a really good point, and there's been really good reforms and efforts, again, in the past several years in particular, something called the Continuum of Care Reform, that really put that emphasis to say, we really need to not rely on a group facility for young people unless it's the absolute last resort, unless that's medically necessary or mental health, necessitates that. We really need to be looking for a family type setting. We also need to be looking to people who know the youth, closer to home, closer to their community first, before we start looking at strangers. And the rationale for those movements is because we know, and it makes sense, if you are living in a group home or a congregate care facility, right, it is not the same experience than living with a family. It also reduces your likelihood of getting some type of permanent guardianship or adoption status later on. So these are really, really important things to know, because very young children are in group facilities, but especially LGBTQ plus young people, oftentimes the system just automatically relies on congregate care facilities because there's this assumption that families are not going to want to take them in. Families aren't going to understand. It's just going to be too complicated to affirm them and understand and, support their needs like any other young person, right? And so this was one of the other findings. So as I mentioned, right, lots of different opportunities for bias. One of the biggest issues we see continuing in systems is confidentiality and outing. So there tends to be this belief that if a child comes out as being LGBTQ+, we need to tell everybody who's in contact with this child. We need to tell their attorney, their therapist, their social worker, the social worker's supervisor. We need to tell the courts. State law, again, respects that child's right to privacy. And that information is considered private, not confidential, but private, meaning it's the child's choice who they want to share that information with. And only under very rare circumstances can an adult professional override that. And it's on a very, very case-by-case basis where they would need to share that information despite a child saying, I don't give permission and authorize that information. So that's a really big issue because that inherently puts children and youth at risk by disclosing that information. In many jurisdictions, there's a lack of legal framework, and I have a slide that I'll show that in a minute. Another big issue is implementation. So any of you who are policy wonks like me or want to go into policy work, Taylor, Cynthia can both attest, there can be amazing laws, some of which we've gotten passed, and we've done amazing work in the state of California and in LA County to get passed. Really wonderful things like the Foster Care Bill of Rights getting updated and this beautiful document that outlines all the rights that young people have. But if they don't know that that thing exists, even though, again, they're supposed to, the social worker is supposed to go through that with them. An attorney is supposed to go through that with them. So if they don't even know that that document exists, it doesn't really do a whole lot of good, right? If social workers don't know those rights, if the attorney isn't as familiar, or the bench officer, right? So if those things don't actually go down to the ground level, it's just sitting there on a shelf collecting dust. And again, there's still a very prevalent issue of the homes where young people are being placed, or the facilities where young people are being placed, not being safe or affirming to them. And that can look like a lot of things, from things like youth being exposed to reparative therapy, so conversion therapy, which again in the state of California is illegal for minors. It can look like youth being misgendered, so called the wrong name or pronoun. It can look like youth not being able to express their gender identity and expression. It can look like youth not being provided the same access to after school programs and social programs and mentors and friend groups. There's lots of examples of what that can look like. Again, even though state law and local policies say otherwise. This is a big challenge that we're still facing today. I wanted to give you this particular map, and it's from the Movement Advancement Project, because I know many of you are not LA or even California locals, and it can be helpful to look at this map to get a better sense of what's happening for if you're from another state. Obviously, I don't have an international map to better understand what the landscape looks like. This particular map is current as of about a month ago. As we know, there's been a lot of movement across the state and on a federal level to take away rights from many vulnerable groups, including the LGBTQ+ community, and especially LGBTQ+ youth, even more specifically trans and non-binary youth. What's even worse is that in many states, there are actual laws that allow for things like discrimination and harassment to take place, that allow things like outing to take place or require that. This map doesn't talk about adoption laws, but there's another sort of interesting parallel around states that do not allow adoption by LGBTQ+ couples. There was actually a study done that found that given the number of LGBTQ+ couples and families that want to adopt, if they were actually legally able to do so, we would have a safe and loving home for every single child across the country who needs one in foster care. That's roughly 400,000 or so, give or take. It varies each year across the country. And there are enough LGBTQ+ families who are willing and able to take those young people in. But in many states and other jurisdictions, they are not legally allowed to do so. So just like many other social issues, we have a very immediate solution to this problem in many different ways, including families who, again, are willing and able. But there's a lot of reasons why we've yet to actually utilize that option. And I will just say, Movement Advancement Project, they give you these maps on a variety of LGBTQ+ issues. It's a cool resource to stay up to date on a variety of different issue areas. To also put this into perspective from a policy perspective, RISE, in collaboration with many organizations like Alliance, like the Pritzker Center, like the LA County Board of Supervisors and Children's Law Center, and so many other wonderful allies, have worked to make sure that California is really a sanctuary for queer and trans young people in care. So making sure that they have the right to gender affirming care, making sure that they have the right to be in a safe and affirming placement, and that the staff working with them have to go under training to be able to better serve them. Those are just a few examples. Most recently, we had a really awesome policy win that was over a decade in the making, where for the first time ever, LA County has finally allocated some level of funding towards LGBTQ+ specific services for young people in foster care. We would love a lot more, but that alone, just to cross that barrier, is huge. It really has opened up a lot of doors for us. And as of a few weeks ago, the state is actually going to be piloting a very similar project where different counties will have the opportunity to do similar work. So we'll wrap up just telling you a little bit more about our approach, and then we can just open it up for, again, any additional questions or comments folks have. As I mentioned, we started out with this foster care research study, and RISE to this day is still recognized as sort of one of the leading programs around this. We really paved the way as the first federally funded and evaluated program of its kind. One of the things that we started with was to look at what is a direct service approach. So for those of you who are interested in careers like mental health, social work, et cetera, this is that type of program, getting to work directly with young people in care, providing case management, working with caregivers, families, other staff. So our care coordination team does that work every day, working with young people across the county who need LGBTQ+ specific supports. We also have our training and technical assistance team, which is my team. And the idea behind this is, as the name suggests, it's not just about a one-time training. If any of you are interested in, again, policy work, education work, one of the things that we know is that training is an excellent tool, but it is only one tool in the toolbox. What that means is you can go to one training, you can go to 100 trainings. But what really matters, particularly from an adult learning perspective, is continuous support around different topics. So in the case of LA County, for example, you can't just go through that LGBTQ+ training one time and expect that that employee is going to understand the concepts thoroughly and be able to implement them on a day-to-day basis. So we utilize other tools like technical assistance, giving them coaching around their caseload. We utilize environmental cues like pronoun pins and being able to create visual spaces that communicate safety to families. A lot of sort of a diverse array of things to create a larger system change. So some of those things look like we have over 30 trainings that we offer, and we often offer much more than that because we'll customize any training. That includes trainings for caregivers, including monolingual Spanish-speaking parents and caregivers, trainings for professionals. We do a train the trainer model because we are a team of 5. We can't possibly train everyone in the world. And at the end of the day, we want each individual agency to have the ability to continue that work without us. We do a lot of policy work, as I mentioned, and this, again, Taylor and Cynthia can attest to, including a lot of administrative and legislative advocacy and creating unique up-to-date tools that address the needs of young people. Because we have that direct service approach where we're working with young people day in and day out, that is one of the things that sets us apart from other programs, is that we are actually able to have all of our work be informed directly by young people. So we're not just over here in a vacuum deciding what we think queer and trans young people need. We are able to get input from them and compensate them for their time to be able to inform where there needs to be work done. So the last thing I'll say before I open it up for any questions or comments is, in addition to inviting any of you who are interested in learning about volunteer or internship opportunities, one of the opportunities to just stay in touch with us, if you haven't already heard about it or attended it, is our 30th annual Models of Pride conference. That's coming up on Saturday, October 22nd at Los Angeles City College. It's a completely free event. And for young people 25 and younger, we have over 100 workshops or so, give or take, as well as sort of a music festival vibe in the afternoon, resource fair, college and career fair, as well as our Parent and Professional Institute. Both of those programs are free. If you want to attend, we would love to have you. Registration will open up actually tomorrow, early registration, or if you want to volunteer and help us out for the day. Again, we always need lots of help. I'll post some links in the chat for you. And last but not least, I'll just leave my information here. And if anybody wants a copy of the slides or anything, I will send that information over to Taylor and team so that they can forward it on to any of you who may want that. But that is my information. You are more than welcome to reach out to me. That is our program website. And also here is the Models of Pride website in case you want to learn more about that event or join us on the day of. And that's all I got. So thanks for having me, and I'll pause there in case there's any questions, comments, anything else.
Wow, Ariel, thank you so much. Any questions from this crew? Thank you
One
so
thing I
much.
will also just add, since I didn't do this at the beginning, I was so excited going off of like Cynthia's presentation to just keep riffing, but I just wanted to give you a very quick background because again, I know there's so many different backgrounds and experiences that folks bring to this work. As I mentioned, I've been a relative caregiver. So I've been a caregiver in the foster care system in LA County prior to working. So I've been at the center for about 6 years now, but I've been doing this work for almost 15 years. I've worked at the ACLU of Southern California doing advocacy work. What else? I also have 2 boxer dogs. They're adorable, and I'm a Libra. Those are important facts about me. But I say all of that just because, again, as you are in particularly your undergraduate programs, it can feel like a lot to be like, do I have to go to one of these graduate programs as well? Or what will my future look like? And there's so many amazing ways that you can affect the foster care system, whether it's being amazing like Cynthia and doing legal advocacy work, whether it's doing policy advocacy work, social work, you name it. There's so many just arrays of experiences that people have. Most of my team and most of the folks that work at the center have some level of lived experience with the populations that they work with, which is also really neat. And that is absolutely an asset that you can bring to the work you do. So as just an additional aside, if folks ever want to connect around sort of like career questions and other things, I'm happy to talk to you offline about that.
Wow, Ariel, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Cynthia?
Oh, I just had a quick question for Ariel. You know, first of all, thank you for your amazing presentation. I'm just in awe of the work you're doing, especially right now. I just wanted to know, like, what your and your staff and your clients' morale is like right now, because I feel myself personally in a state of shock and somewhat paralysis about the fact that we have a federal Supreme Court and we have, you know, half of the states that are going backwards and trying to take away rights that the LGBTQ community has had fought to obtain. And I'm just wondering, you know, what the morale is inside the organization in terms of, okay, we're geared up for what we have to do now. I don't know, I'm not phrasing it very well, but
Sure.
I'm concerned in all the various communities I work in. I'm concerned. And we're the students on this call. It's really going to be. There's going to have to be an energy coming from that generation to fight this type of regression.
Yes, I follow what you're sort of asking around sort of engagement, morale, all of that. You know, no matter what administration, who's been in office, who's been on the Supreme Court, since our, you know, conception, we have always had a fight ahead of us on a lot of different issue areas. And these very recent events are no different, but are certainly, I think, more pervasive, more extreme, right? I know that when our previous administration came into office, we had a very immediate response effort, because one of the biggest concerns we had at the time was additional measures against folks who were undocumented, and how folks trying to access our life-saving resources like medical care or domestic violence resources or foster care resources might be targeted by coming to access resources and our services. You know, I think it's a mixed bag, right? I think in any of this work, as I'm sure you can attest to, there are some very difficult moments. We get exposed to a lot of hardship, but we also get exposed to a lot of resilience. And it is a labor of love, and getting to work alongside colleagues like yourself who are so passionate and committed to this work despite all of the changes we see. I mean, I know from a legal landscape, right, you're also having to contend with the ways in which laws may change, things like ICWA. So for folks who aren't familiar, the Indian Child, why am I blanking on ICWA?
You got it, Indian Child Welfare Act.
Welfare Act, there we go, right? So really important wins that we've had in the past coming under fire. And then so many other things, certainly things like reproductive justice absolutely affect LGBTQ plus young people at a disproportionate rate. And so, you know, one of the ways I will say that you can get involved, I can put a link in the chat as well. We have an amazing program called the Resistance Squad. They're part of our policy, advocacy, and community building department. And they actually started right after the previous election. And they are sort of a group of grassroots folks. They do everything from door-to-door canvassing to phone banks with folks in different states where there's really important down ballot initiatives and races and votes happening. And this is actually a really cool way for you to get involved, Bruins, because I know, again, many of you may be registered to vote in other states. And even if you're not able to vote, you can still impact people in your home communities, right? These are your neighbors. These are your previous teachers and coaches and, you know, you name it. And so making calls to those people when there's really important things down ballot can be a, you know, big way to get involved. So I'll post some information in the chat on that as well, because again, if you're feeling helpless or feeling like, gosh, how can I possibly make a ding in it? There are lots of different ways that you can connect with folks across the country.
Thank you, Ariel. That's awesome. I'm going to put that in the chat right away so I can write it down.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Ariel. Any other questions? Okay, so Ariel, as you did your training, I was reminded of a young person that I worked with when I was at the Alliance for Children's Rights who was seeking the medications for, tell me what the phrasing would be.
Hormone replacement therapy, maybe?
Yes, the hormone replacement therapy. And their attorney actually pushed back pretty significantly. And it was a lot of work that we at the Alliance did to advocate for them and help them acquire what they wanted from it was Children's Hospital, CHLA. So a great example of that issue that you raised, the work that we did and the collaboration that we did with medical professionals and the court. So this stuff is real. I think during these trainings, it can seem like we're just like talking about stuff theoretical, but every example that Cynthia and Ariel have raised today are things that I've worked on personally and that many of you will touch and work on in your own careers. So I just want to thank you both for making this so practical. With that said, and if there are no other questions, we will conclude today's Academy.